Con men who run scams are everywhere. But if there's something that makes Stephen J. Russell stand out, it's the sneaky tricks he used to get out of jail. He became the famous scammer known for escaping prison 4 times. He took scamming to another level, having impersonated over 14 individuals, including FBI agents, judges, and doctors. In 1957, a few months after being born, Stephen J. Russell was put up for adoption by his birth mother. Baby Stephen, born in North Carolina, spawned from a complicated relationship that resulted in a failed marriage. His mother had just divorced his biological father and had decided she wasn't ready to raise a child on her own. A few years down the line, Russell would eventually track down both birth parents, only to find out they had remarried each other and had 3 more children, all of whom were his biological siblings. He didn't take this well and claims this is where his rejection issues first started. He was raised in a very conservative household by his adoptive parents, David and Georgia. After he discovered he was adopted and rejected in a way by his biological family, that changes in his behavior started. First, he started getting into a lot of trouble at school, and after a while, he became obsessed with fires. Having noticed this reckless behavior, he was sent to a boys' home for therapy, where he finally came to important conclusions about his life. He had a very high IQ of 163, and he was gay. On Friday, May 13, 1971, Russell finally left the boys' home, a date that would become something of a hallmark for his crimes and prison escapes. After his high school graduation, Russell was ready to live a pretty regular life and became a cop. His time as a police officer taught him several valuable lessons about committing a crime. Watching people get caught time and time again is a solid lesson in how not to do it. These lessons came in handy for his future stunts. Like many homosexual men at the time, he felt the need to hide who he really was, which is why he decided to marry Debbie Davis, the police chief's daughter. Together, they had a daughter named Stephanie, who was born 2 years into their marriage. But as expected, the pressure of living a life that wasn't honest to his desires came knocking. After 9 years together, Russell confessed his sexual orientation to his wife, and they decided to separate. Russell claims that his past traumatic experiences set the tone for his future crimes and reckless behavior. The death of his adoptive father shook his life, and he decided to move to Houston and then Los Angeles. One way or another, his sexuality played a role in his decisions. After an executive at a food services company where he worked found out he was gay, he was fired. Russell turned to scams, feeling rejected from society and thinking he'd never hold a stable job. He faked a back injury to acquire $45,000 from the insurance. He resorted to selling fake Rolexes and ultimately wanted to create a fake identity to help him commit more frauds. He went as far as to apply for a passport after stealing the identity of another man named Stephen Russell. However, he was caught in the process and eventually indicted by a grand jury. Russell came up with bail money and was a free man until he'd eventually have to serve his jail time. While out on bail, Russell met Jimmy Kemple, reportedly his first male lover. The pair moved into an apartment together in Palm Beach and decided to spend their lives together. Unfortunately, Kemple had AIDS, and in the 90s, still the height of the AIDS epidemic, it was untreatable. Kemple was given only a few years to live. Russell was eventually sentenced to 6 months in jail for passport fraud. However, his yearning to be with Kemple burned, and he knew he had to escape. He watched closely and took mental notes on how the guards at the Harris County Prison operated. They took smoke breaks every 3 hours, enough time for him to sneak off and explore. While exploring the prison, he found the room where female inmates would leave their possessions before going through processing. In it, he spotted a pair of red pants and a tie-dye t-shirt. On May 13, 1993, Friday, Russell put the escape plan in motion. He waited for the guards to take their break and put on the women's clothes. He'd also managed to steal a radio from the same room, believing it would give him a sense of authority. He took the elevator down to the 10th floor, an area where no inmates were allowed. He then went down to the first floor, surrounded by guards, and walked out the front door of the building. He had performed one of the most difficult stunts in the world, escaping from one of the toughest prisons in Texas. According to Russell, he did it all for love. He finally reunited with Kemple, only to be arrested once again when the pair were caught in Miami trying to fly to Mexico. Once again, for some inexplicably lucky reason, he was released on bail again. This time, bail was set at $20,000, a sum he was able to pay easily. The pair left for Mexico City, where, After a while, Russell noted it wasn't the best place to treat Kempel's condition. They came back to the U.S., where he decided to use Kempel's complicated health to help them financially. Russell had gotten a job at a company in Chicago and used Kempel's birthday and social security number for 2 years to collect $200,000 on his life insurance policy. Both of them were arrested. As per usual, Russell used his acting skills and charm to convince prosecutors that he was also dying of AIDS. During his trial, prosecutors received a letter from Dr. Richard Cohn from the Medical Diagnostic Center of Philadelphia stating Russell was indeed in the late stages of AIDS and would die in a few months. A compelling letter persuaded attorneys not to pursue the case further. Both the doctor and the letter were fake, written by Mr. Russell himself. While he'd escaped the law once again, he didn't have the same luck in Texas, where his first insurance fraud and escape charges were still open. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and found himself back in Harris County Jail. It's during this prison stint that Russell meets the love of his life, Philip Morris. Morris had been arrested for failing to deliver a rental car on time. In some states, a delay in giving back a rental car is considered theft. He was struggling to pay for the restitution, so he was sent to a halfway home where he escaped and was later arrested for breaking his bail. He was sent to the same Texas facility as Russell. The pair met in the prison's library when Morris, who was only 5'2", was trying to reach for a book. Russell noticed him and reached for the book to hand it to him. They started chatting and became inseparable. Morris was paroled in October 1995 after serving 9 months. Russell followed him 2 months later. The two lovebirds moved into an apartment 30 minutes away from the Texas prison and both decided to live a grand lifestyle. Russell used a friend's influence to cash out another life insurance he had taken out on Kempel. The pair bought each other a couple of Mercedes-Benzes, Rolex watches, and jet skis. They bought and refurbished a house in Clear Lake, but continued hunting for real estate in River Oaks and Southampton. Even though they knew it was all too much, they were finally together and free. They bought fancy suits, and Russell even got plastic surgery. Of course, once a con man, always a con man, Russell managed to fake his CV and landed a job as a chief financial officer for North American Medical Management, a company that worked in patient care. He was even described as an easy-to-work-with guy who was also very likable. It didn't take long for Russell to add many illegal zeros to his already lavish $90,000 a year salary. He was investing millions from the company in short-term accounts, taking 50% of the revenue for himself, stealing $800,000 overall. As expected, after 5 months into his new job, Russell was caught. He was charged with embezzling the $800,000, and his bail this time was set at $900,000. Morris was a little luckier. His bail was only $50,000. As usual, Russell knew he could find a way out of this one too. He called a friend in Florida and told him to type a bond order and mail it to him. Bail bond orders are usually written by lawyers and signed by judges. Russell, a seasoned con, knew how to type one and instructed his Florida friend to do so over the phone. Now, all he had to do was get the letter into the court clerk's hands, a task that seemed impossible as he'd been shackled to other inmates. With the letter hidden under his jumpsuit, Russell saw a woman approaching with a stack of files and papers in her hand. He dropped the letter near her as she passed, and a good Samaritan picked it up and handed it to her, thinking she had dropped it. Later that night, he made a 3-way call with his friend, impersonated the judge, and spoke to Harris County District Clerk to order that his bond be lowered to only $45,000. He said there should be a hard copy of the order somewhere in the clerk's office, and lo and behold, the person on the other end found Russell's forged letter. After that, Russell wrote the check and was a free man. He reunited with Morris and fled the city. They wanted to go to Florida. Russell was quickly arrested in Florida and flown back to Texas, where he pleaded guilty to fleeing. He was then sentenced to 45 years at the Estelle unit. During this prison stay that he plots his most elaborate escape yet. He devised a plan that required him to stockpile green Sharpies from the prison's art classes. Once he had saved enough, he extracted the ink from them and filled his cell sink with water. He then dyed a spare white prison uniform in the water to look like surgical scrubs. He even made sure he didn't get any streaks in the fabric. He proceeded to wrap himself in plastic bags so police dogs wouldn't be able to track him down by scent. Over the plastic bags, he put on his green dyed prison clothes and waited for the woman at the front desk to make a phone call. Once she was distracted, Russell walked out of the facility dressed as a doctor. He walked to the nearest house, knocked on the door, and said he was a doctor who had been involved in an accident and needed to be taken into town. According to Russell, he was sipping margaritas at a bar in Houston by the time they knew he was gone. He got back home to Morris through the back door. Both of them now wanted men for skipping bail, escape, and fraud. They traveled to Biloxi, Mississippi, and had a big falling out on a hotel balcony. Morris even tried to push Russell over the edge. During a tapped phone call, both of them were tracked down by authorities and were separated. Morris was convicted of helping Russell embezzle $800,000 and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. While in prison for 10 months, Russell faked obvious AIDS symptoms. He lost a lot of weight and made sure he wrote fraudulent medical records in the prison's library that confirmed his condition. The authorities never ran any tests, and he was transferred to a nursing home. He even made some calls from the home impersonating a doctor and saying he had died. He almost got away with it were it not for a detective who spotted him a year later. Arrested for the final time, Russell received a life sentence for his embezzlement and multiple escapes from prison, 144 years in total. I Love You, Philip Morris, starring Jim Carrey and Ewan McGregor, premiered in 2009, a film detailing the elaborate life of love and luxury lived by one of America's notorious con men. Stephen Russell has become one of the most guarded and looked after inmates of all time. He spends 23 hours in solitary confinement and is given an hour to shower and exercise each day. His daughter, Stephanie, visits him from time to time in prison. He hasn't had any escape attempts since the Sharpie stunts. Since I Love You, Philip Morris premiered, Russell's also become very popular in prison. Some inmates even ask him for autographs. In 2018, Russell wrote an article for the Huffington Post about his life behind bars and everything the movie missed about his experiences. It leaves us wondering if Russell's got any elaborate escape plans when Friday the 13th rolls around each year. Click here to watch one of these next videos.